Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 430 be withdrawn from the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Senator Bonham moves that Senate Bill 430 be withdrawn from the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Bonham, to your motion.
The first chamber deadline has expired, and I move that Senate Bill 430, which establishes procedure for charging aggravated version of certain assault and attempted murder offenses when defendant causes permanent physical injury to victim during the commission of a crime. The only way victims of these life-altering crimes can have a voice in the 2023 session is to support this motion and bring it forward to a vote. We have brought this bill forward a few times. This is the fourth iteration of the bill, and despite the fact that we continue to try and offer a voice for victims, it continues to fail to get consideration beyond a work session. And despite promises over the last 4 years of commitments to get the language right to define permanent injury, we continue to end up in this situation where there is no discussion on the measure. We can't get the bill to advance and give consideration to these victims. And I think today would be the day to allow for that to take place. You heard my remonstrance this morning from the victim's grandmother with an appeal to offer appropriate consideration for the life-altering changes. You know, I've said for years with this bill that the difference between, in some cases, murder and attempted murder is bad aim. And so I think that that's ultimately what we're asking for, is for the victim and their families to have their day in court, so to speak. And so without the opportunity in committee and without a commitment, despite the fact that, again, over the last 4 years, I've been told by numerous people in the House that we had brought this bill forward, that we would define this language specifically to where it would at least get an up or down vote. We've never been able to get that far. And work group after work group, commitments from various House members that ultimately served as chair of the committee, and then to come here to the Senate. And again, we've had other considerations of bills in the Senate Judiciary Committee that ultimately didn't even have public testimony. This not only didn't get its day in court with public testimony, but certainly didn't get its day in court for the vote. And so, in the name of Ezra, the young man who at 2-year-old could pet a horse and push a bowling ball down a lane, who will never walk, who will never talk, who will never get to drive a car or go to prom, he deserves this vote. And so I'm asking for your vote here today and your support of pulling this measure to the floor and giving it sincere consideration.
Thank you, Senator. As a reminder, under Mason's Section 491, Sub 4, it is not in order to discuss the merits of the bill upon the motion to withdraw from committee, so it's more a question of process over substance. It's just a reminder to folks in terms of our rules of the Senate. Under discussion, I recognize Senator Knope.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, process matters, and the only opportunity that we have to discuss an agenda that Oregonians care about is to bring these bills to the floor today, because the committee had time to put other bills to the floor, but apparently they didn't have time for these bills that we think matter, and that our constituents think matter. And so the only way in this process that we have is to be heard, and for the minority to be heard, for our constituents to be heard, is in fact to do this procedural motion in order to withdraw a bill from a committee. Hopefully you'll vote on it, because we think most Oregonians would. And so we want to give everybody the opportunity to vote to hear this bill and to pass this bill, because we believe it's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Recognize Senator Finley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as a former chief sponsor of the bill in the last session and the state senator for the district that this young man lives in, I encourage your support for this motion. Justice needs to be served for this young man and his family, And the only way to do that is to allow this motion to come to the floor and the Senate vote on this measure. It's critical. It's terribly sad that we have to do this for the third year in a row, that we can't get consensus among ourselves, that we let partisan politics enter into it. This is not a partisan issue, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Recognize Senator Thatcher.
To the motion, I think it's a very important move to withdraw this bill from judiciary, and whether we give it a vote directly, I hope we do, or at least send it to a living committee where it can be vetted and discussed. We have had this discussion before, and yet we are able to pass things like out of the Judiciary Committee, we passed things like Senate Bill 529. We had plenty of time for that, and Senate Bill 577 and 618. And we had a number of hearings that supported, I guess, maybe things that wouldn't be considered as earth-shattering as the bill we're asking to withdraw, but modifying statutes to allow non-attorney associate members from the Oregon State Bar to practice law in certain scope of practice. We've had bills that would modify proof of parentage. We've had bills to modify the definition of sexual contact. That was a good bill. We've had bills that would provide the lack of verbal or physical resistance that make it so it does not by itself constitute lack of consent. Also very important discussions here. But we've gone on and we've missed the boat when it comes to certain things, and this bill really needs to be able to come to a committee. We've had discussions over a couple of Senate bills this morning that we've taken a lot of time discussing, and I think it's very important that we discuss the very issues that are important to Oregonians, such as what is being proposed here. And so withdrawing it from the Judiciary Committee and either taking an up or down vote on it, or even better, moving it to a living committee for it to be further discussed and vetted and not just killed outright by not scheduling a public hearing. So that is why I am supporting the motion to withdraw this bill from the Judiciary Committee. It is a very important motion, and to vote yes on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Recognize Senator Brocksmith.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I too support pulling Senate Bill 430 to the floor today. We've been talking about this motion for quite some time. You've heard a lot of merits behind the motion, especially from the bill sponsor, and the fact that this piece of legislation is critically important to Oregonians in protecting the most critical Oregonians themselves. I really think that by pulling this bill to the floor through this motion, we can actually do some real good for our most vulnerable. I mean, it has been a long time coming. As the good senator stated, this motion brings the culmination of many years of work and together, and so I know that by approving this motion, you, Mr. President, have the opportunity to see that this piece of legislation gets its due justice through this legislative process, and I appreciate, colleagues, your support.
Thank you, Senator. Recognize Senator Linthicum.
Thank you, Mr. President. With regard to this motion to bring the bill to the floor, it's perfectly appropriate for us to consider the value of having debate, the value of having the opportunity to think about and discuss bills that are appropriate and needed for the citizens of Oregon. So bringing this bill forward is part of the process. It's part of our responsibility, and I urge you, everyone, to thoughtfully consider this motion to bring this measure here to the floor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Yep. Seeing no additional discussion, Senator Bonham, do you wish to close?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Process matters. And again, as a member of the minority party that feels like sometimes my voice in this body is marginalized and set aside, at times when I feel like victims are not having their opportunity to have their voices heard, and then to have commitments from the legislative body to put together a work group to address the issues that were raised so that it could get its day in court, so it could have a vote. Those things and those commitments matter. And I had made a commitment that I wouldn't do this, that I wouldn't pull this bill to the floor, but that commitment was predicated on advancing the ball. And so here I am in a terrible situation of not honoring my commitment because the other commitment was broken. And I don't like this, but at the same time, this is something that deserves and merits and warrants discussion and consideration. And so, colleagues, we bring this bill to you this morning. And Mr. President, with all due respect to this body, I would appreciate a call to the Senate to consider this measure.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bonham has demanded a call to the Senate and is joined by Senator Thatcher and Senator Linthicum. The doorkeeper will bar the doors, and the sergeant-at-arms will attend, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Anderson. Bonham. Boquist. Campos. Dembro. Finley. Frederick. Gelser-Bluen. Gerard. Golden. Gorsuch. Hansel. Hayden. Jama. Knope. Lieber. Linthicum. Manning. Meek. Patterson. Przonski. Robinson. Brock Smith. Solman. Steiner. Taylor. Thatcher. Weber. Woods. President Wagner.
Here. All members not excused are present. Those who are of the opinion that Senate Bill 430 should be withdrawn from the Senate Judiciary Committee will answer aye as their names are called. Those opposed, no. The clerk will please call the roll.
Anderson. Bonham. Boquist. Campos. Dembro. Finley. Frederick. Gelser-Bluen. Gerard. Golden. Gorsuch. Hansel. Hayden. Jama. Knope. Lieber. Linthicum. Manning. Meek. Patterson. Przonski. Robinson. Brock Smith. Solman. Steiner. Taylor. Thatcher. Weber. Woods. President Wagner.
No. Woods is a no.
Excused: Gorsuch, Hansel. Voting nay: Campos, Dembro, Frederick, Gelser-Bluen, Golden, Jama, Lieber, Manning, Meek, Patterson, Przonski, Solman, Steiner, Taylor, Woods, President Wagner. 12 ayes.
The motion has failed. Recognize Senator Thatcher.
Vote explanation.
Please file your explanation.
It's important that we remember that there are other members of this chamber who have very important issues that need to be discussed, and that's why it is important to have these hearings when we have a chance. But when we don't have the chance, that's what we have left, is the motion to withdraw, and that is why I voted for the motion to withdraw the previous bill.
Is there remaining? No. Recognize Senator Bonham.
Vote explanation, Mr. President.
Please file your explanation.
So specifically, the bill is named for a young man, Ezra. He was 2 years old when he was beaten brutally, and ultimately is now 7 years old. He's lived in a state of low quality of life since the time of the incident. And the maximum penalty for this individual that purposefully, intentionally perpetrated this crime was capped by a Measure 11 consideration. The difference between murder and attempted murder is 300 months versus 120 months. It is substantial, yet the intent of the harm that was done to this young man and the condition that he was left in, we've argued this entire time with this bill for the last 4 years that he had a life sentence. Ezra had a life sentence. He has a shunt in his brain. He seizes multiple times a day. He has a feeding tube. He has a trach. He can't walk. He can't talk, and requires 24-hour care. The fact that we don't consider that anything other than attempted murder, in my mind, is just a disservice to the sense of justice that we pledge allegiance every day to, liberty and justice for all. But in some cases, you know, we're leaving people with this void, and yet in this perpetual state of poor condition. His life was altered permanently. The difference between death and life in this case is a very thin line, and yet the consideration for sentencing is considerable. So I wish that we could have considered this today. I will continue to bring this bill back to get its day in court.
Recognize Senator Knopp.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vote explanation.
Please file your explanation.
Thank you. I voted yes on this motion because somebody needs to speak for Ezra and get justice for Ezra. And I know many of my colleagues want to have that happen. And we've had this bill for multiple sessions now. And I'm all for putting the right people in prison and keeping them there. And sitting on my desk for the last few weeks have been all the pardons and commutations that the governor made. And as I look at those, and you just pick a random page, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 people who are convicted of delivery of methamphetamine whose sentences were commuted. And yet, the person who committed crimes against Ezra and those people who have had crimes committed against them, like Ezra, are they in prison and doing significant amount of time that is justifiable and giving justice to Ezra and his family. And so far, I don't think we've accomplished that. So if you're going to let people out who have basically are drug dealers, then let's put the right people in prison. And we have the opportunity to do this with Senate Bill 430, and I support that opportunity to be able to accomplish that, and that is why I voted for the motion today.
You, Senator. Recognize Senator Linthicum.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vote explanation.
Please file your explanation.
Thank you. I think we can't hardly say it enough that crimes like this and individuals like Ezra need our protection. And it becomes a fascinating question when you start thinking about why are we not willing to support the least of these? Why are we not willing to step out of our rhetorical boundaries and cross over this line and make an effort to address real crime that harms real people in our real communities and real neighborhoods? And I think it's relevant to ask these questions here today on this floor in this body. And I voted to bring that measure to the floor specifically for this reason. We're all familiar with Charles Dickens and how he could paint a picture of true evil that was happening in the London area during his lifetime. we're facing that right now, right here in Oregon. And I'm fascinated by the fact that there was so little consent to step out of the box, cross the line, and get the job done that we are capable of doing by working together. Thank you, Mr. President, for allowing me to file a vote explanation.
Thank you, Senator. Recognize Senator Brocksmith.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vote explanation.
Please file your explanation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I voted yes for the motion to bring Senate Bill 430 to the floor for a number of reasons that many have been discussed already. But I actually had to realize that I had a constituent who passed away from this type of abuse within the last year. And I can only imagine what their parents go through every day as Owen's brother doesn't have him there to play with him anymore, let alone what the parents feel every day. And I've met and had the pleasure of speaking to Ezra's family, and that pain that I could see in their eyes, that they know every day, that they feel every day, that they don't feel that the justice was served for what has happened to his son, their child, is horrific, Mr. President. And so I support Senate Bill 430. I'm sorry that we couldn't as a body, I thought we had it there for a minute, we couldn't as a body move it to the floor today. But it's not only justice for for Ezra, but it's justice for Owen, for me, at this point, because poor Owen won't be here any longer.